The Buffalo Sabres are finding new ways to win. How about that for a sentence? And they're legitimate playoff contenders in the process. Starting to feel a little desperation, though, in the Pacific Division. A showdown in the City of Angels tonight that went to overtime. We'll get into that. Plus, the Rangers and the Devils were both in action tonight. And these might be the two most interesting teams in the league right now, not always for the right reasons. We'll spend quite a bit of time on both of them tonight. You're not going to want to miss that. All ahead on Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before. Only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. Thrilled to have you all with us. You can like, subscribe, and follow our shows on YouTube, whether it's this show that you're a big fan of or any of our other team shows. They're all available for you at your preferred podcasting platform, or check them out on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The wild card round is over. The divisional round is here. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode, so visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. I'm Alex Wiederspiel. I write about hockey for Yard Barker. I hang here on Locked On NHL Game Night, and I'm joined tonight by hockey play-by-play TJ Shalott, who is hanging out with us tonight on what was a quiet is not the word I will use, but it was a 4-game night, and it affords us one of the most interesting nights of hockey of the season for a number of different reasons, TJ. I know we're going to get into the games, but boy, there were fascinating storylines on the ice and a lot off the ice tonight.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of stuff that we expected to see, and then there was a lot of stuff that we did not expect to see, which kind of kept it a little bit interesting. You know, it kept you glued to the TV a little bit. We have that game that happened up in Madison Square Garden. You've got another overtime game out west. A lot of that stuff, some of it expected, some of it not.
I don't want Ranger fans to get mad at me. I just will say, I since I purchased this hat, the Rangers have 1 point in 5 games. So I'm just throwing that out there. I don't think it's my fault. I'm pretty sure it's not, but I like the hat. But right now it's causing problems. That said, we're gonna get there. We're gonna start though with a different team that plays on MSG, the Buffalo Sabres, who are fighting and fought their way back to life when things looked at their most grim for this fan base. And now every game that they face off with an Eastern Conference opponent is critical from here on out because A, the conference is incredibly mushy, TJ. We know that. B, the team they faced off with tonight is also not guaranteed a top 3 spot in the Metro Division, which means they could be potentially facing for one of those 2 wild card spots. And for the Buffalo Sabres, this game, maybe the most important thing that happened, it didn't go to overtime. They get the win. They stop Philadelphia, who had a 6-on-5, couple of 6-on-5 opportunities, but ultimately they score the empty netter, take this one 5-2, and make sure that they get the only 2 points that came out of this game. And so for the Atlantic Division race and for the Eastern Conference race, we can now officially start saying things like those were really important 2 points the Buffalo Sabres get tonight in a 5-2 win.
Yeah, and they were just a much better team going up against Philadelphia, who it didn't seem like they were ready to go. I don't think they were expecting this kind of attack from Buffalo in this one. And, you have to give a little bit of credit to Philly. They've lost their last 4, but when you look at their last 4 opponents, including tonight, you've got Buffalo, you've got Tampa Bay twice, and they're in the middle of that huge run that they're on. And you've got Toronto, another team that's been on the upswing as of late. So those are 4 very difficult teams, but they're 4 Eastern Conference teams. And if you want to measure yourself against what's looking like to be your playoff opponents, if you're able to make the playoffs, this is how you get it done. These are the litmus tests. And Philly just fell a little bit short here tonight. I think Buffalo's speed was a little bit too much for them to handle. You take a look at the first third of this game, particularly when Dan Vladar was in the game. He ended up coming out of the game just a little bit into the first period, into the second period. Ended up having a little bit of an injury, and Philly's defense came to play. I mean, they would hold Buffalo to just 14 total shots in the game, including It was, let me do my math here real quick. It was 9 shots in the second 2 periods. So once Vladar came off, only 9 shots came in on Samuel Ersson, but it wasn't enough to get done. I think Buffalo just had them outworked tonight, outsped them. They just really had them on their heels all game long.
You don't win a lot of games by scoring 5 goals on 14 shots because it just doesn't happen that often. But one thing worth noting, if you want to go by the fancy stats, and obviously the fancy stats come with their own sets of issues, and public models and private models differ a lot of the time. But it is worth noting that the Sabres did actually put up almost they put up 3.5 expected goals tonight. So it's not like they were like they had some quality chances based on what the underlying numbers had to say in this one. Let's go over them real quick. And of course, it helps that 2 of them came on the power play. Rasmus Dahlin scored twice. Buffalo jumped out to a 3-0 lead. As you noted, they got up to a fast start. 3-0 lead before Philadelphia finally responded with an Owen Tippett goal in the second. Couple of notable scorers this evening. Tage Thompson, a 2-point night for him, but didn't find the back of the net. Ryan McLeod's empty netter also had an assist on a goal earlier. 2-point night for him. Owen Tippett in on the only 2 Flyer goals of this one. I know he's your dude. One quick note on the Flyers, and then we can jump over to the next game tonight out west, which was an absolute gem. I have been skeptical of Philadelphia for 2 big reasons. The first is that, as we mentioned the other night, I feel like the Flyers have officially kind of exited their rebuild. Now, that doesn't mean that they're in all-in mode. They're in what would we describe, I think, as sort of the build mode now. But they exited their rebuild really without a premium prospect at any of the major positions. Not at center, not at defense, not at goalie. Right? That's a bit of a concern. And that leads to the second point, which is I have been very concerned, bearish, if you will, about the Flyers goaltending situation all year. Even when Dan Vladar was playing well, my thought always was this has never been a guy who's been asked to be 1A before. We know how hard it is to go from I'm playing good hockey 30 games a season to I have to play at that same level for 60 games a season. I am not convinced Dan Vladar is going to be able to do that. And it's not just about, is he a good player or not? It's like you pointed out tonight, can he stay healthy for that length of time? That's hard hockey when you're being asked to play 60 games for the first time, or 55 games, or whatever that number will be for the first time in your career. Continues to be my concern about Philadelphia.
Yeah, and for Vladar, he played a career high last year, 29 games. Tonight was game number 28 for Philly. So depending on what this injury is and how serious it might be, you would like to think he's probably going to have a new career high in games played. And you're asking a lot of him. Like you mentioned, he is a guy that he has not been asked to be that 1A guy, and he's having a great season. I'm not trying to take anything away from him,
Absolutely.
But Philadelphia, when you talk about where they're going to start their rebuild, they have to start in goal and work their way out. They have some young promising wingers. You mentioned Owen Tippett. I love the guy. He's a great speedster. He's got some incredible hands. That's a guy that you can kind of build off of a little bit. You've got Nikita Grabenkin up there who's helping out as well. So they have some of these wingers that are okay, but they definitely need centermen. They definitely need defense, but they've got to start in goal. The Carter Hart thing, that didn't work out. Of course, not their fault. I think they picked the right player. They just didn't pick the right person in that regard. So they need something. Samuel Ersson was supposed to be, in their dream, it was supposed to be Carter Hart, Samuel Ersson, 1A, 1B, or even just a traditional 1 and 2. They would have been perfectly fine with that. But of course, Carter Hart, everything happens there. He's out of the game for a while, doesn't come back to Philly, ends up in Vegas. Ersson isn't developing, I don't think, the way that they were wanting. We saw a couple of articles earlier this week about, is he going to be a piece if the Flyers aren't going to make the playoffs? Are they going to start to sell? Is he going to be one of those pieces? And obviously Dan Vladar, as well as he's playing, he's not the long-term answer either. So they've got to get something figured out in net. I think they're pressed to maybe make an acquisition in the offseason and bring in a veteran that they can keep for 4, 5, 6 years and then kind of work that way. I don't think they have enough time to bring up, to draft someone young and throw them out there. So we'll see what happens with Philly. But I would, if I am that brass, if I'm Danny Briere, if I'm Keith Jones, that's where I'm starting. It's in the blue paint. I'm starting to build out because I think they have a lot of youth up front that will endure a little bit of this mini rebuild and can contribute on the other end.
I think Philly does have the right coach, by the way. And again, who knows how long that'll last, because coaching is such a nebulous thing these days in the NHL. But I do think they made the right call there. Before we go to break, Vegas gets an overtime win over Los Angeles tonight. How about this for a stat? These two teams have now combined, and of course they went to overtime. They have combined to go to overtime 23 times this season. When you look at it, Vegas has won fewer games than they have lost, but 12 of those losses have been either in overtime or the shootout. So the reality is, the thing we know about Vegas, they're pretty good at getting to overtime. They play a lot of close games. What that means, we won't really know until we get to the playoffs. And let's be real, we expect Vegas probably will add at some point. For Los Angeles, it's a little bit more of a concern because they have a lot of these 1-point games, but they're much further behind in the standings. They really need to start converting 1-point games into 2-point games, and in particular at home, where that has been an issue of late. Mark Stone gets the overtime winner. Kudos to Brant Clark. He tied the game late for LA with the goalie pulled, his 6th goal of the season. Let's hear from Eddie Garcia real quick before we wrap this first segment.
A lot of familiar themes for the LA Kings in their 3-2 overtime loss to the Vegas Golden Knights. Missed opportunities, lack of production on special teams, lack of opportunities on special teams, and of course, not a lot of offense for the Kings. The key in this game was the first period. And even though there was no score in the first period, it was an opening period that was dominated by the Kings. They had zone time. They had shots on goal. They were doing so many of the right things that usually will equate to success. And yet, despite all those shots, despite that zone time, despite their aggressiveness, right from the start, no goals and no power play opportunities as well. They only had 1 power play opportunity in the entire game. They do get a Brant Clark goal in the final seconds with the goalie pulled to pull out a point in this one, which the way things are tight in the standings, that's important. But again, familiar theme for the Kings, not enough scoring, not good special teams, not a lot of opportunities on special teams, and they lose at home, disappointingly so, to the top team in the Pacific Division, the Vegas Golden Knights, 3-2 in overtime.
Eddie, I'll give you the final, or Eddie, TJ, Eddie just got the first word. TJ, I'll give you the final word on this one. Big win for Vegas in the sense that anytime you get 2 points against a division foe, it's big. LA, man, there are definitely some concerns being masked by 11 overtime losses as far as where they are in the standings.
Yeah, 100%. And you can kind of see it in how they lost this game. If you watch back the goal, they just lose track of Mark Stone. I mean, that is a guy that you cannot lose track of in overtime, right out in front of Darcy Kemper. Poor guy was hung out to dry. There was nothing he could do. It was one of those plays where everybody's following the puck down below the goal line, and they get caught. Puck squirts free. Right there's Mark Stone, probably one of the easier goals of his career with a goaltender in the net anyway. If you're LA, you're just looking at this going, we got a point. You look at the scoreboard tonight. We're going to get to the game later. Jersey, Seattle. Seattle got a point. At least you're keeping pace there. You're still only 2 points behind Seattle for 3rd place in the Pacific. So there is a silver lining here for the black and silver out in LA.
So the Devils are showing signs of life, by the way, but even still, GM Tom Fitzgerald with an interesting bit of a mea culpa today, talking to the press in the Garden State. Plus, no mea culpa from Chris Drury as the Rangers are taking on water with a team and goaltender swimming tonight. That's next ahead on Locked On NHL Game Night. Our show brought to you in part by our friends over at Quo. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way to do this. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades that you can make. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Now, when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number. Nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread thanks to Quo, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or your computer, and you can even keep your existing phone number. Now, it's no surprise, Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to fast-growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnhl. That's QUO.com/lockedonnhl. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, TJ, into the meat of the show. This is basically where we're going to spend the rest of our program today. I think LA might have a chance of sneaking into this conversation as well, but let's start with the games themselves. The New Jersey Devils pick up I think for them, an emotionally fragile team who got a win the other night. Critical overtime win in this one, especially after giving up a 2-1 lead in the second period. I think it's always tough when you're not playing well and you give up a goal, you give up the lead, more importantly, especially off of a mistake penalty that led to Jared McCann's power play goal. And yet the Devils survive the third period. They get to overtime. Nico Hischier scores his second of the game, the winner there. And so whatever is else going wrong with the Devils, I'm not going to sit here and say that they're fixed. I'm also not going to say they're irreparably broken because, again, I've watched Toronto, I've watched Washington, I've watched Buffalo, I've watched Seattle all go through these roller coaster ride seasons. How about this, though? Dougie Hamilton's resurgence after being unceremoniously dropped from the lineup. He has 3 points in 2 games since being added back into the lineup. He's been on for 4 goals for the Devils and none against at 5-on-5. Jack Hughes and Luke Hughes, each with 2-point nights. Jared McCann and Vince Dunn, each with 2-point nights for Seattle. And Nico Hischier's 2-goal night includes the overtime game winner. Regardless of everything else that has been going on for New Jersey, regardless of what Tom Fitzgerald talked about with the press today, the most important thing that could have happened is they string together 2 points.
Yeah, for sure. And if you look at this game, this is exactly how Jersey wants to play. They don't necessarily want to give up the lead, but if they do get into a situation like that, they play with confidence. They still feel like they're in the game. And when you look at the score sheet, it's not all on Jack Hughes. Yes, he had 2 assists in this game, but that kind of goes to the point where someone else can step up and have a big game. Nico Hischier, this is just his second 2-goal game of the season. You expect more out of a guy like that. He probably should have 2 goals, maybe 4 or 5 times already by this point in the year, if he's truly playing up to his traditional production that we're used to seeing. But you look across the board, Jack Hughes 2 assists, Luke Hughes 2 assists, Nico Hischier with those 2 goals. And then you're also getting some depth help. Cody Glass now into double digits. He had a goal in this one as well. This is exactly what Jersey was hoping that they would be, on nights where Jack doesn't necessarily have to carry that entire team and be the only one who seems like he can get into the offensive end and make something happen. Other guys were chipping in. If they can string together 5, 10, 15 of these type games over the next, 2.5 months or so, they could be one of those bubble teams that pops their way in.
All right, we're going to put a bookmark in that for now. We are going to come back to the Devils in our third and final segment tonight. But for now, we've got to get to the game that had the most goals of the evening, 12 of them in Madison Square Garden. And unfortunately for Ranger fans, Ottawa had 8 of them, including an empty netter at the end, when it looked like the Rangers had just like the tiniest sliver of a pulse in a game where they were pretty much the Walking Dead the entire time. Let's start with Ross Levitan of Locked On Ottawa Senators and hear what he had to say about Ottawa's big 8-4 win tonight.
Days, 2 games, and 2 wins. I'm Ross Levitan from Locked On Senators, and Ottawa used a 4-goal first period to pull away from the Rangers and ultimately win this game 8-4. We know Brady Tkachuk loves playing at Madison Square Garden, so tonight he decided to celebrate by scoring his 200th career National Hockey League goal while adding 3 assists on the way to his second career 4-point night. Levi Merrilainen was good through 2 periods. They did, though, score 3 in the third period. But all that to say, Ottawa did get offense on the power play. They got offense from the fourth line. There was a lot to like about tonight for the Senators, and it's important to get these 2 wins because the Sens are playing catch up, and they've got 2 games this weekend against Atlantic Division opponents in Montreal and Detroit. We'll get into all the details of this game on the postcast tomorrow on Locked On Senators, available everywhere you get your podcasts.
It hasn't happened enough for Ottawa this season, TJ, but it's always good to get a win when your goaltender, your backup goaltender, who is right now pressed into starting duty, honestly stunk. I will say he gets a pass on both Gabe Perreault goals. Those were gorgeous individual efforts. Like, just that's a high skilled player deking in close, doing things that high skilled players do. But the goal he gave up late, they weren't great in the third period. He was a little shaky in the third. He was not the worst goaltender on the night, though. Jonathan Quick didn't get any help from the Rangers, and he also didn't help the Rangers in this one.
Yeah, I mean, some of the goals against Jonathan Quick, traffic out in front, there was skates. You're trying to, look around skates, sticks, knees, everything like that. There was a lot of movement with this Ottawa team. So you can't blame Quick for all of them, but there were plenty that I know that he would want back, on the other side.
For the second period, I think, by the way, are the ones that stand out to me from the blue line. There wasn't a lot of traffic. There was a Ranger turnover on one of them, but those were like the backbreakers, and he got pulled after that, by the way.
Yeah, and on the other side for Ottawa, I know that Maryland didn't play the best game, but also at the end, this is such a weird game. When you're up 6-0, going into the final minute of the second period, you're not going to be nearly as sharp because you haven't seen a lot of action in your end. Your defense is going to take their foot off the gas a little bit, figuring this game is in the bag. And it was, let's be honest. So you don't get the same kind of performance. It's a little bit easier to answer that bell when it is a close 1-goal game or a tie game. When it's 6-0 going into the second, you're going to kind of be a little bit shaky in that regard. And I think it's also one of those things, to get yourself up to it. Once you give up a goal or two and you try to go, okay, hold on, I got to strap myself in here. Let's get going. That's a hard thing to do. You can't necessarily just turn it on at the drop of a hat. So he's won 2 games for Ottawa now. So I think, is he their number one? He's going to be for the time being. I think he can carry them a little bit. They're going to have to worry about just managing his workload a little bit. But on the other side, the bigger problem is going to be that back end for the New York Rangers. I mean, Jonathan Quick, he is the only option right now for the Rangers. They don't have Adam Fox. He's got to be better than that. And look, they probably still lose this game, even if he does play well. But you got to still be better. You got to instill some confidence in the guys in front of you that even when they're not playing well, you're going to do okay.
All right, so we do have a short from John Chick, the host of Locked On New York Rangers. I'm going to save that for our final segment where we're going to dive into a lot because there is a lot of chatter around this Rangers team, that Devils team. Granted, they might be righting the ship. I still think the fact that their GM felt the need to kind of take some of the heat for what has happened this season says that not all is well in New Jersey either. It's a strange time for hockey in the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. We'll talk all about it coming up, as well as a couple other teams that sort of fit into this roster construction mess. That's ahead here on Locked On NHL Game Night in our final segment. New year, big goals. I always make them. Somehow, though, there's even less time to cook than usual. If you're trying to eat better, but you don't want to spend hours grocery shopping or meal prepping, Factor makes it easy. These are fully prepped meals designed by dietitians and crafted by chefs, so you can eat well without all the work. Factor meals are made with quality, functional ingredients, lean proteins, colorful veggies, whole foods, and healthy fats. No refined sugars, no artificial sweeteners, no refined seed oils, just real food that fits your goals, whether that's eating healthier, managing calories, or getting more protein in your diet. Now, I've been using Factor, particularly on busy days when I know I'm not going to have time to cook, which feels like at least half the week at this point, it's a game changer for me. My favorite thing is the variety. There are more than 100 rotating meals every week, including high protein, calorie smart, Mediterranean, and even GLP-1 support options. I'll admit I do have my favorites, and I'm kind of a creature of habit, but the fact that there's as much variety means I can usually swap out something every week or so. It makes sticking to your goals, though, a lot easier because the food is already done for you. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off and use code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off, code LockedOnNHL50. Make healthy eating easy with Factor. All right. I have been excited since we talked about this earlier during our pre-production meeting, TJ. I've been excited for this the whole night because I think this is one of the more interesting parts of sports in general. But I think the NHL, especially as the only hard cap league in North American sports, it's the most interesting thing, and that is roster construction. We typically don't have enough time to talk about it, but the fact that we had the events that we had tonight, the teams that we had playing tonight, I wanted to take a few minutes for you and I, and especially with your background and experience, having worked in the American Hockey League, I wanted to take a few minutes and at least chat about some of the things that we're seeing across the league and certainly involving the teams tonight. And I think the big thing you and I were talking about the other night that we just didn't have time to work into the show was this sort of concept and this never-ending debate that GMs get hired for and fired for. And that's the question of what is more important, building from the net out or building around or building a support, an environment that allows you to have sort of interchangeable goaltending, a la the Adin Hills of the world. We've seen Andrei Vasilevsky and we have seen Sergei Bobrovsky win Stanley Cups in the cap era. We have seen Adin Hills and Jordan Binnington pre that big contract win Stanley Cups thanks to the environment and working well within. And so that's where I want to start with this before we dive a little bit into the New York Rangers and talk with John Chick. I'm curious your perspective on this, though.
I think you do have to consider the back end at the least, both defense and goaltending, because you could have, and this works honestly for every sport. You could have the best goaltender in the world, but if you have poor defense, it's allowing odd man rushes, breakaways, and just hanging them out to dry every night, it's not going to do any good because nobody is going to stop every single puck that comes at them throughout the course of a season. It's just not going to happen. But at the same time, if you have great goaltending, great defense, and you don't have any offense, you're not going to win a game because if you don't stop every single shot you see, you're going to lose because you got nobody who can score on the other side. So it's this interesting thought of where do you spend your money? And for me, I'm spending probably 50%, let's go 40% of it on my defense, and I'm splitting the other 30% between my goaltending and offense, because if you find the right offensive defenseman, you can manufacture some points from the blue line, but you have to have solid goaltending. There's teams like Carolina who over the years have been one of the best teams every single year, making these deep playoff runs, and they just can't get over the hump. And for my money, it's because they just do not care about the goaltending position. They care about it, but they don't invest in it. They just bring up guys from the AHL. They bring in Freddie Anderson, the ageless wonder, who's certainly on the downslope of his career. And it just seems they plug in these guys that maybe just, hey, get us through this. And that's not going to win. If you have a guy that you got to tell him, hey, get us through this playoff run and we'll be fine, it's not going to work. You have to do that when guys get injured, like what the Rangers are doing right now with Jonathan Quick. They're going, hey, we know you're 39. Just get us through this. Help us out a little bit here. But you have to put that emphasis on the back end, particularly your defensemen, because they can cover up a lot of problems in goal, and they can cover up a lot of problems offensively as well if you have the right offensively minded defenseman and it all gels together.
They also play the most minutes per night outside of your goaltender, so that's another huge part of it as well. And certainly when you get it wrong, they can cause problems. And this has been sort of the fascinating thing about the Rangers. No team in the NHL has been better at identifying goaltending talent over the last, let's see, it's 2026. Legitimately, I think you can say 4 decades going back to John Van Beesbrook. But if you want to start with Mike Richter in the early 90s, that's fine as well. But Beezer, Richter, there's a little bit of a gap because, of course, Richter dealt with injuries in between Richter and Lundqvist, but it's a very small gap. Lundqvist, of course, had already been drafted, was on his way up, and might have gotten his start during the lockout year. If the lockout doesn't happen, he comes in, takes the league by storm the very next season, and then they go almost totally seamless transition from Lundqvist to Shesterkin. And yet, in that span of time, the Rangers have one Stanley Cup final victory, 2 appearances, which is basically about average, right? If you go to the Stanley Cup twice in 32 seasons, that is quite literally average. Now, on that note, before we dive a little bit deeper, let's hear from John Chick of Locked On New York Rangers.
Rangers just lost 8-4 to the Ottawa Senators, and that final score does not even begin to do justice for how bad of a game this was for the Rangers. Basically just did not even compete in the first 2 periods. Just looked completely disengaged, disinterested, just atrocious body language for basically the entire team. This team doesn't have a whole lot of talent, and right now they don't have a lot of fight either, and that's a pretty deadly combination. And they've now lost 5 in a row. So going to break it down in the next episode of Locked On New York Rangers. Do not miss it.
All right, before we get to the Devils, because I do want to take a few minutes on them, here's what I wanted to note, TJ. So the Rangers missed on 4 consecutive top 10 picks. Now, you can say, hey, at least Capo Caco, at least Alexis Lafreniere, they were both NHLers. Capo Caco returned a top 4 or top 6 defenseman, depending on how you view Will Borgen. But they got something for Capo Caco. He is at least an NHL player, but he was a disappointment based on where he was drafted. Alexis Lafreniere, disappointment based on where he was drafted. But in the 2 drafts before that, they had top 10 picks and they whiffed on both of them. And then just to add insult to injury, the guy that looked like he actually should have been a top 10 pick, Philip Hedl, could never stay healthy, and they got lucky they got anything for him in that JT Miller trade. But here's the note. So now with Igor Shesterkin out, it's the issues of the New York Rangers are kind of laid bare for all to see, and that this might in fact actually be good if the Rangers can learn the right lesson here, in that, yes, having the right goaltender means that you don't have to do some long, crazy rebuild. The fact that they have Igor Shesterkin, who was playing at a Vezina level, signed to an 8-year deal, doesn't mean that they have to do some crazy Chicago or San Jose style teardown. But if they don't get the message that something major needs to change, I honestly don't know what to say.
They definitely have to hit on a couple of draft picks, because when you look at just the age of the New York Rangers, and I have it pulled up right now. If you break this into 3 different tiers, if you go to those guys that are 20 to 25, 26 to 30, and then 30, 31 plus, they really only have guys that are in that younger time frame, the 20s to 25s. When you talk about Noah Laba, who scored tonight, when you talk about Will Cooley, Brennan Othman, those guys that are 23 in that frame. And then you have the older guys, the Vincent Trocheks, the Mika Zibanejads, that are all plus 30. They don't have anyone in that intermediate area. Those guys are going to be the Brennan Othmans, the Will Cooleys, the guys that are in their 20 to 25 range right now. Give it 2 or 3 years, they're going to be plus 25, and you need someone behind them to be that next step. So you've got to nail these drafts now, because as you're young, the guys that have that ceiling, as they're still young and they're developing, you want them to get better. Hit that 26, 27-year-old mark with experience, with talent, with skill, and then have a couple of good draft picks, some prospects that are a little bit younger to follow them up, because you're going to lose some of these, the JT Millers and some of these guys that are a little bit older. So this draft pick, next year's draft are going to be really important for the New York Rangers.
This draft right now, if the season ended today, they have the 5th best lottery odds. So yeah, the Rangers have an opportunity to maybe right some of the wrongs, but I don't know how their fans, I don't know how they could really trust that this is something that's going to happen. I will say, before we switch gears to the Devils real quick, which will be our final part of this tonight, the interesting thing about this, a lot of fans are very upset with Chris Drury, and I think that's completely fair. I think Chris Drury has diagnosed the Rangers' problems well, and every remedy that he has tried to prescribe, every time he's written a prescription, it is almost always exclusively, outside of the Vincent Trocheks of the world or the Eric Gustafsson signing, they've usually been the wrong prescription. Trading for JT Miller 4 years later than he probably should have. That has been Chris Drury's problem. His timing is seemingly always wrong. He's either late or he's early, and then by the time he needs to remedy something that happened too early, he's already lost out on the value. Let's finish with the Devils. Tom Fitzgerald said that their start to the season, and you can't even call it a start anymore, their season has simply not been good enough. There's been a combination of a million different things that have occurred. There's the Quinn Hughes saga. There's been the goaltending. Jacob Markstrom gets that 2-year extension, and he has not been very good. The Devils right now, after tonight, have the 10th best lottery odds, meaning the Devils are where the Islanders were a year ago. They could theoretically jump into that number 1 spot. I still think that this is a team that has a chance to make a run. I'm not buying Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, but my goodness, so much has looked wrong with New Jersey outside of this little 2-game winning streak. Do you feel like they are taking that step back towards what kind of Toronto and Tampa and some of these other teams who had these rough patches this year did? Or are we still seeing a New Jersey team that might have some flawed construction?
I think they have a little bit of flawed construction, and they obviously have taken a little bit of a step back. They're underachieving compared to where we thought that they were going to be, especially, with how they started the season. I think they got their first 3 wins right away. They just rattled them right off. And, it was a team that was doing really well. Then the Jack Hughes injury, and all of a sudden they lose their identity through all of that. And they're starting to find it, at least if this game is any indication, they're starting to find it. But when you talk about, Tom Fitzgerald, I feel like this is a guy that knows the pressure is on right now. And I'm not saying that he's on the hot seat or anything. I don't know any more than anybody else that's out there. But when you talk about that, the Quinn Hughes saga, that's clearly a guy who's trying to make a splash. He's trying to make a move because he knows he's only 1 or 2 pieces away from making this team a real contender. When you see him meeting with the media and having this conversation almost out of the blue today, it's kind of a guy that's saying, I need to quell some of the voices on the outside. I have to talk to some people and let them know my thoughts and what we're kind of trying to do. So they're clearly working on some things, and looking at that, I would expect them, as long as they're still in and around the same standings position that they're in now, I would expect them to be buyers, because I would feel like Fitzgerald's going to go out there. He's going to try and make a big splash, bring someone in that can help them right now, just in case that this is one last go for him before ownership decides to kind of move on from him, if that's what they're thinking. But I'm just kind of trying to read between the lines with some of the thought process and stuff like that. I think Sheldon Keefe is the right guy behind the bench. I just think they've got to put this all together. They certainly have the talent.
My one thought, Jack Hughes is not a center. He's not a winger either. He is positionless. Go find somebody who can be your 2C, play Heishier at 1C, and let Jack Hughes do whatever he wants. Let him freelance. Let him be the Ed Reed, to use an NFL analogy, of the New Jersey Devils. He's too talented to force him into a certain role, in my opinion. He can be a nuclear weapon if you allow him to be that. Folks, we want to thank you all for tuning into Locked On NHL Game Night. We also want to hear your thoughts on this. Eddie and Shu, by the way, will be on tomorrow's show. If you want to talk puck with us, I'm on social media as The Radio Spiel. TJ is at TJ Shalat. You can see on the screen right now. And of course, if you're listening on in podcast form, just go find us at The Radio Spiel or at TJ_Shalat. But if you're watching, you can see it on your screen right now. If you want complete coverage of your favorite NHL team, there's a Locked On NHL Team pod and YouTube show for you. We have one for every NHL team. This show, Locked On NHL Game Night, is here for you each and every night of the regular season and playoffs, wrapping up the NHL and everything that happened that night. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this show if you're watching on YouTube. We want to see your thoughts on not just tonight's games, but what we talked about here in this final segment. Roster construction. What do you value most, and what do you want your team to do, particularly if you're a Rangers or Devils fan? And I'd like to hear from Kings fans too at this point as well. That will do it for this episode of Locked On NHL Game Night. For TJ Shalat, I'm Alex Wiederspiel. Thanks for listening and watching Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your teams every day.